What's up, guys? How's it going? It's going. This talk right now is on breaking the stigma of psychedelic therapy. So I want to start by asking you guys a question. Really cool, small little group. Hey, guys. How's it going? Have you guys ever been in a situation where you've withheld information talking about psychedelics just because of the stigma, the way it would be received? Maybe at like dinner with the in-laws or something, or at work. Something comes up like related to mental health and you want to be like, you should try mushrooms, but just because of the stigma, you're like, you just keep your mouth shut. That's probably for us here, probably less, but a lot of people, especially in our profession as first responders, we don't talk about it. It's like we have to keep it private because this has been criminalized for our entire lives. And this stigma of it being criminalized for so long is so deeply ingrained in us that it's so hard for us to talk about it. But that's the biggest bottleneck in this whole psychedelic movement, because we've got awesome stuff out here with psychedelic therapists and research, headlines, podcasts. All of this stuff is moving so far. What's lagging is us. And for all of us to take part in this movement, it's the social aspect of it, where we just say, you know what? I'm gonna start talking to people about this. So I will explain what PTSD is and how first responders experience it, because it's a little bit different with first responders as a 30-year career, what the actual symptoms are. There's the flashbacks and the nightmares and all this Hollywood stuff that we see, but that's not necessarily always how it looks. And first responders aren't even taught about what the symptoms of PTSD are. So we have to be more aware of what the symptoms of this are, and then how we can, or what's happening because of that. So the crisis that first responders are facing with PTSD, suicide, depression, moral injury, and just burnout, rising call volumes and everything. And then I want to talk about psychedelics. And I want to just tell my story with psychedelics and then talk about how you can tell your story. By the way, do any of you guys have family that's firefighters or law enforcement or anything? So this is like, you can share with I'm recording it so you can share it if you want. And this is like, I'm here to share my story, so hopefully others can see this and say, you know what, he shared his story and nothing happened to him, so I can share my story too. As a quick disclaimer, just because I have to say it, I work for Los Angeles Fire Department, but this doesn't represent any official views or opinions of Los Angeles Fire Department, unfortunately. I'm also a student at California Institute for Integral Studies studying psychedelics and psychedelic science, and I'm not here on behalf of CIIS, so I have to say that too. They make me. The best way to do this is by painting the picture, just telling a story of just one call, one of many that we've all been on as first responders that I'll never forget. It was a night where we had been to a fire. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. So I'd been awake like 23 hours at that time. It was just dirty, covered in soot, and wanted to get back to bed. But I'm in the hospital because we transported a patient, and I'm cleaning the paramedic's gurney. And I hear a voice down the hallway who was a 12-year-old kid. And the voice down the hall said, "Where's my uncle?" He was asking the hospital staff where his uncle was. The hospital staff didn't know yet where his uncle was, so they just told him, "Let's worry about you right now. We'll figure all that out in the morning." But when he said that, my heart kind of sank because I knew who his uncle was, because my crew and I were the ones that pulled his uncle out of the fire, transported him to the hospital, did CPR, and he's covered with a sheet, pronounced dead, a couple rooms down, after the doctor had pronounced him dead. And what occurred to me is that 12-year-old kid was gonna wake up the next day in the trauma center, and that's when he's gonna find out that he no longer has a family or a home, because there were 2 people that died that night in the fire that were pronounced dead on scene, and then this gentleman that was pronounced dead by the doctor at the hospital, and then this teenage kid. So the reason I tell that story is just to paint the picture of the types of things first responders see, and that's not every day at all, but over the course of a 30-year career, no matter where a firefighter or cop works, first responders will see something on that level hundreds of times in their career. And over time, it slowly changes the nervous system and the brain, literally changes the brain and makes new neural connections and changes how somebody responds to incidents in their life and how somebody behaves. The nervous system's just not designed for that repetitive type of thing when most people only see something like that once or twice in their entire lives. I've got some numbers on mental health for first responders. These numbers are from US Fire Administration. 40% of first responders will meet the criteria for PTSD at some point in their career. I think that number's bullshit. I think the number's probably way higher because we're reporting that on surveys. 40% is still a high number though. And then we have suicide. First responders are 72% more likely to commit suicide than the general population. And 42% of first responders have thought about suicide compared to just 13% in the general population, which is also still high. We have very good numbers on line of duty deaths. If you take line of duty deaths that are reported to National Fire Protection Association and compare that against the suicide numbers, a first responder, law enforcement and police, 6 times more likely to die of suicide than at a fireground. And it blows my mind because that's a number that we can change. The fireground deaths we can't always change. Things happen that are just out of control, but we can change this suicide number. I want to give you some background on call volume because that's also something that's changed a lot. And I also want to say I'm not bashing Los Angeles Fire Department because this is a universal issue across the country. I just happen to have Los Angeles Fire Department call stats because this is where I work. In 2016, the numbers that I pulled were, okay, actually I have to explain the difference between incidents and unit responses. If we get one medical incident and an engine and a truck respond, that's one incident, that's 2 unit responses because 2 different emergency vehicles went. So in 2016, Los Angeles responded to 1.2 million unit responses. Fast forward 8 years to the last numbers I have available, 2024, 1.65 million unit responses, which is a 37% increase in call volume over just 8 years. That means less sleep, and sleep is where we really process that trauma. If you're not sleeping, you're at a higher risk of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety attacks, depression, because you're not processing these things. So combine the rising call volume and more incidents with the lowering sleep, we have an epidemic. That's why it gets so serious. I also have numbers on fire stations. In 1960, Los Angeles had 106 fire stations. No, 1960, correction, 112 fire stations. Today, we have 106 fire stations. And to compare that with the incident numbers, in 1960, it was 125,000 incidents per year. Today, around 500,000 incidents a year, 500,000, with less fire stations than there were 60 years ago.
Why aren't they increasing it based on
money? It's all money and politics. It's unfortunately happening across the country where some places are kind of building new fire stations, but LA City hasn't built a new fire station in a long time. And the call volumes everywhere, no matter who you talk to, are going up, and there's a lot of reasons for that are speculative. But at the end of the day, I don't really know why the call volume has gone up that much. And we're not going to change that anytime soon. But what we can change as first responders, what we can all change as human beings, is our mindset. Psychedelics really help with that, because what psychedelics can do really well is dissolve old belief systems and give us a blank slate to build these new neural connections and start questioning things and coming up with new ways of understanding ourselves and our situation. There's a lot of other things that psychedelics do that I'll get to. But this mental health crisis has a hidden impact. It's not always these big outbursts and panic attacks. It's the little things that build up over the course of 30 years. So first responders don't realize that it's even happening, and we're not taught to recognize it. It's that irritability and the numbness over the years builds up and creates this distance in relationships and harder to connect with people. That is almost by design, since as people, one of the things that draws us to this job and one of the things we're taught is to compartmentalize, because you cannot be on an emergency scene treating a baby and be too emotionally attached to the situation. You have to shut it off and do your job. But what we don't do is turn that off. When first responders off duty, their nervous system is still always at work. We've got compassion fatigue, which is huge. And compassion fatigue, if you're a nurse or a doctor, you know about this too. It's when it just becomes a job. Because of repetitive exposure to other people's pain, constantly, there's a numbness to other people's pain that develops. And it's harder to relate to people, like the homeless person on the street that calls 911. It's harder to relate to that person over the years. And if you talk to any first responder, the reason they do this job, they'll tell you, is to help people. And over the years, becoming more and more distant from the humanity of that, the purpose starts to deteriorate. And when we lose purpose with anything we do in life, that just opens the door for depression. There's hypervigilance, which is another thing that's by design at work. First responders, especially law enforcement, have to be on high alert all the time. Eyes in the back of their head type of alertness. That continues off duty. The nervous system doesn't know when they're at work and they're not. So driving through intersections, high alert because of all the things that happens at intersections. Same with at a restaurant or a public space. Start to pay attention. You won't notice an off-duty cop with his back to the door, always scanning the environment. That's great for on the job because that's what keeps us safe, but the nervous system's not designed for that. That fight or flight response isn't supposed to be constantly activated, as you guys know. And then we have moral injuries, which really don't get a lot of talk in first responder professions. People talk about moral injuries a lot with law or with military that go overseas and have to do things that are against their own moral code. First responders actually experience this a lot. There's situations where a firefighter might be at a fire where there's more than one rescue to be made, but could only rescue one. There's brush fires where what we do is structure protection, go to a home that's not on fire and protect it from catching on fire. Meanwhile, the livestock is right in the fire line, but if we protect the livestock, then the fire can get these homes and keep burning. There's law enforcement that clears homeless encampments, and they know that that's not really fixing the problem, it's just kind of moving it around. Again, taking the oath to go help people and knowing you're just going to work every day and not really helping people is another moral injury, or going on the same patient for an overdose multiple days or weeks in a row and feeling like they're not really changing anything. This is just a job. We want to go help people, but we're just creating this situation where it's still happening. There's a lot of examples too with law enforcement. Just one more would be like a search for a missing person called off. It's been 48 hours or however long. They call off a missing person search. Or what I've seen a lot is law enforcement having to arrest a victim of a violent crime knowing that there's going to be retaliation, especially if it's a gang thing. But a law enforcement officer can't just not arrest the person that did the crime because there's going to be more crime because of that arrest, but they know that's what's happening. So all of that being said, that takes us to psychedelics. I discovered psychedelics in 2016 on a podcast, like probably a lot of people have, especially guys like us in the fire stations that listen to a lot of different things. It was 2016 when MAPS got approval for their phase 3 trials on MDMA, and I was like, whoa, holy shit, this drug that I only knew as a party drug is helping people with PTSD not have PTSD anymore. So I started reading about that and just following that research for a long time, but I never tried any psychedelic. And then a point came later on in my career where I was experiencing a lot of those symptoms that we were talking about. And for me, the biggest one was mainly just an overall numbness, because that's what we train our nervous system to do, is to just be numb to everything. And all of this pain and this trauma and these heavy emotions that we don't feel get blunted, but so do all the good emotions, and everything just becomes very flat. And the day for me was when I bought my house. I should have been like so over the moon with joy, because that's such a cool thing. I took the keys from the realtor, I said thank you, and then I go inside to the empty house and I laid on the floor and just stared at the ceiling and wondered, what is wrong with me? Why can't I feel joy about this? This is awesome, and on paper it looks great. Everything's awesome on paper, but there was just nothing really there. And then you start to think, like, what is even the point of life if everything's just flat and you can't feel all the things you're supposed to feel when everybody's posting pictures of weddings and parties and all this vacation type of stuff, and go on vacation and still thinking about work? It's gets to the point where what even is the point? That is the same time our psychedelic movement pretty much started taking off a couple years ago. People started posting about this on Instagram, and I saw an ad on Instagram, of all places, for an ayahuasca church in Mexico. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. Let's give them a call and see what happens. So the next thing I know, I was on a plane to Mexico to drink ayahuasca. And I sat down, we had our whole sharing ceremony and intentions and a despacho where we did all these rituals that go with ayahuasca ceremonies. And I had been talking to the medicine facilitator earlier, so she kind of knew what I was going through. And we go up one by one to get our first serving of ayahuasca after the sunset. And then I go up, everybody gets 1 cup, but I go up last, and she pours 2 cups, and she hands me 2. And she said her intuition tells her how much medicine to give each person. So I was starting off with 2 cups, so I was like, okay, great, I'm ready for this. I go back down to my mat and I lay down and was expecting the light show and the love and the expanded consciousness, this great transcendent experience everybody talks about, and I didn't have any of that. I had anxiety, just straight up anxiety. And I felt it actually coming up through my nervous system. But the difference between, and I'm not an anxious person, I don't normally have anxiety attacks, but the difference was I could feel in my body a specific point where the anxiety was coming from. And when I would focus on each part of the body, I would have a memory surface that I didn't ever really think about that much, things I thought didn't bother me. So somehow all of these memories were all coming up at the same time, but also all the stress that came with them. But I knew on an intuitive level that what was happening was a release. It was experiencing these things I had really not addressed. And now was the chance to feel them and let them out. And then we go for a second serving of ayahuasca. I drink that second cup and I lay down on my mat. And the facilitator actually said, she warned me, she said, you know, after you drink this cup, it's not gonna get better, it's gonna get worse, right? And I was like, yeah, sure, I guess so. So I drank the second cup and she was right, it got worse. The veil between the conscious mind and the unconscious just went from a little bit loose to completely dissolved. And that's what psychedelics do really well for first responders who think that we're okay. It's nothing, this stuff doesn't bother me, I'm fine. When that veil dissolves and you can really see what has been back there in the depths of the unconscious all of this time, it was like a tidal wave of hangings and shootings and drill days and the academy, all this stuff, like all at once, multiple memories all getting processed at the same time somehow, and it was just a storm. After a while, that started to kind of fade away. So I had that next cup and just had a complete ego death. It was like there was no more firefighter, no more anxiety, no more story or history that I'm telling myself. It was just expansive consciousness and geometry. And then I realized I didn't know what I was or who I was, and I came back to my body in kind of a panic. But what it showed me is the difference between that expansive state of consciousness where there's no baggage and normal life where I'd built these walls completely around my heart myself. I did that. So that means I had the power to undo that, because the only difference of these two mindsets wasn't just the substance, it was the mindset. That contrast was the biggest thing for me. I've talked to a lot of firefighters and first responders that have used psychedelics, and I hear a lot of the same things. Just to go over some of the things that people say, I think is really awesome. Healing begins with openness and awareness. First and foremost, we have to be aware of our negative feelings to release them. And by and large, as first responders, we're not aware of it. The only two emotions are angry or I'm fine. There's a whole huge vocabulary of other emotions that we just don't understand or know. Trauma can also be transformed. There's a term, post-traumatic growth. Psychedelics really help with that, because these pathways in the brain get so solidified over time that these stories we tell ourselves about what happened in our life get so ingrained, it's hard to think any other way. But when you dissolve these pruned neural pathways and anything becomes possible, now we can start asking, what did we learn from that experience? What purpose did it serve? What do I want to believe about that? Things like that. And then happiness comes from within. That's what everybody says. Okay, we realize psychedelics show us we can't change a lot of the things out here, or even if we can get exactly what we want in life, it changes before we even settle into it sometimes. But what we can always change and have control over is what's within. So we learn that we're our own healers, we're our own shaman, and we can change our internal state to be more accepting of everything that we can't change. And then these platitudes become felt truths, the fortune cookie platitudes, like just be yourself. You hear something like that, and after psychedelics, you're like, holy shit, it makes so much sense. Like, I just gotta be myself. Anybody could have told you that, or after a breakup, she wasn't right for you anyway. It's like, you know that, but when you can really feel it, that's when the door opens for real, meaningful, lasting change. Then responsibility is freedom, because that's responsibility, and realizing, okay, I can change. I'm the one who was depressed in response to all these things. It's not giving anybody a pass for doing anything to you, but we realize we can always be in control of our own response to things. And my favorite is, when you heal yourself, you heal the world. And somebody told me once, is people don't remember what you said or did. They remember how you made them feel. So if you're a healer of any sort, when you heal yourself, you raise your vibration, your frequency, and other people can feel that. And that is what allows other people to heal, is that feeling that they get from you. After the psychedelic experience comes the integration. I never really understood what that was at first. People would say you just got to journal and meditate. So I came up with a little more of a detailed integration framework, because first responders love the 4-step process, or the Smith system. It stands for SMITH, and all of these acronyms and algorithmic ways of understanding things. So I put together a 4-step integration process that breaks it down a little bit farther than just the make sure you're healing and journaling. And integration isn't just a private conversation with yourself, it's something you hear. There's more to it, but nobody ever tells you that. They just say, dude, you gotta do the work also, but nobody really tells you what the work is a lot of the time. So I based it off of fireground tactics. If you weren't ever interested in learning fireground tactics, you get to now. The first step when we get to a fire is size up. We look at the building that's on fire and size up what we got. Where's the fire? Where's the smoke? How fast is the smoke moving? Where's the front door? And where's the hydrant? Gathering all the information. What kind of building is it? How long has it been burning? All of that is done in a split second when a first responder gets on scene. In healing and psychedelic integration, that size up is sizing up our emotional state. And that's when we start to become aware of our negative feelings and really asking ourselves, what is it I feel? Where is it in the body? And we can start looking later at where it's coming from, but that's becoming aware of our negative state. And our relationships, where are the problems in our relationships really stemming from, and what do they feel like? The next step in fireground operations is deploy. That's where we deploy our resources to the areas they need to be. So this is pull big hose line or small hose line to the front door. This is the chief gets on scene and says, truck 1, you need to go to the roof, cut a hole over the fire so the smoke can get out. Engine 1, you need to go back up engine 2. Based on the situation, what is our plan of attack? And now we're getting everything in place so we can actually operate. In healing, this is tracing the narrative back to a previous memory where this belief was planted. This is where we stop identifying with that negative belief. So if there's a belief underneath everything that says vulnerability isn't safe, vulnerability is weakness, well, where did that come from? Was there a moment in school growing up? Was there a moment in childhood where that belief really was planted? That's a hard thing to do conceptually. So a psychedelic experience that allows that stuff to come up organically is very helpful. And the next step is extinguish, where we actually open the hose line and put the water on the seat of the fire as close as we can get to the source of the heat. And that's exactly what we do in integrations. We get as close as we can to the source of the fire. This is when we finally stop identifying with those feelings. So we've recognized already that those feelings are within us, and we've recognized what those feelings are, and now we're going to stop identifying with them. So instead of I am depressed, it is I feel depressed because of maybe external circumstances, but I am not my depression. I am a whole human being just like everybody else. There just happens to be clouds there. There's other things. This is where we do our internal family systems work, if you're an IFS therapist, which is opening a dialogue with your inner child. What is 10-year-old you saying about this situation? What does 10-year-old you need? The protector parts, that might be what am I hiding from by not talking about these experiences? And sometimes it's having to face them again. We also have to thank these parts. This is a big thing in Andean cosmology from Peru. This ayahuasca tradition is these things that we always say do not serve you anymore. They did serve you in some way. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. So there's, as an example, vulnerability isn't safe. That served us by getting us to this point in our career by being very professional and promoting, or whatever the career path was. And then step four is the overhaul. After a fire is out, we have to open up walls, see if anything's still on fire, and then make sure it doesn't keep burning. In integration work, this is when we're actually going to do what most people think of when we do integration. It's the meditation and the journaling. And if you have somebody to talk to and you like to go to therapy, things like that. Because what we're doing is we're keeping these old patterns, the fire, from reigniting. When we dissolve our history of thought patterns, that just allows us to think in new ways. That's why when we say psychedelics don't do the work, they assign the homework. They dissolve the old belief system, but you're gonna fall back into it if you don't install a new belief system. So that's what did I learn from this situation? How did it help me? The hypervigilance, for example. That isn't something that never served us, that kept us safe on the job, but now it's acknowledging thank you, I forgive you, and I'm grateful for all of the success that you have brought me in life. And when we thank those things, then we can release them. As far as the social stigma goes, getting back to the social stigma of psychedelics, we want to start telling our stories because these stories are what really changes things. Think about autism 15 years ago or HIV in the 80s and 90s. These things were very stigmatized. And how did we destigmatize them? Just by talking about them like they're normal. We're at that point with psychedelics. For me, I think about yoga 10 years ago. you wouldn't go to a fire station in the morning after your 4-day, which is your weekend if you're on shift work. You wouldn't come in after a weekend and somebody says, what'd you do over the weekend? You're like, oh, I did yoga. You'd get laughed at. Like, yoga? Pfft, I lifted weights, you know? But eventually, people got sick of that. And we were exactly in the situation with yoga 10 years ago that we're in with psychedelics now. Everybody's doing it, nobody's talking about it. But eventually people said, you know what, fuck it. Yoga really helps me. So I'm gonna tell the guys I did yoga and I feel a lot calmer today and my back doesn't hurt as much. And they can laugh at me if they want. And then somebody else did that and somebody was like, I do yoga too, actually. I got the same things. So it creates this ripple effect or this domino effect where other people, where we are in fire stations where maybe more than one person has had a psychedelic experience but don't even know about it, where other people can say, actually, I did that too. And when you're ready, you should try it too if you want to. I'm not pressuring anybody to do anything they don't want to do, but we start this conversation, we make it more normal. But if you have a professional type of job, you might be thinking, well, that's great, but I still can't show up at a board meeting and tell everybody I'm doing ayahuasca. I want to push back a little bit and say that to an extent you can, if it's the right place and the right time. And I want to give just a few little tips and tricks to telling your story in a way that's better received. When we tell our story, one of the most important things we have to emphasize is this is medicine, not drugs, because that's what the heart of the stigma is. The heart of the stigma is it's a substance. The FDA or the DEA says it's got no medical use and it's got a high potential for abuse, so it's bad. But we're saying, no, this is medicine, it's not drugs, and drugs are tools for avoiding yourself and escaping. Like alcohol, people use alcohol to avoid things. Psychedelics, on the other hand, you can't avoid. If you take a heroic dose of mushrooms, you can't avoid this subconscious stuff that you really don't want to deal with. You're in a pool of it, you have to deal with it. Another thing about alcohol that's interesting, and this is kind of a side note, is in our culture, we don't really consider alcohol a problem until it affects one of three things. That's family and relationships, health, or career. If somebody drinks 5 drinks a day, but has all of those 3 things seemingly intact, we're like, it's just social drinking, or he's a functional alcoholic. But that's another thing I want to push back on is any amount of drinking that's used, because we have to look at the purpose, any amount of drinking that's used to avoid an emptiness somewhere else in life is just a symptom, just another symptom like hypervigilance or irritability, just another symptom. Another tip for telling our story is find a way to sneak in there that it's legal in a lot of places. We have Oregon and Colorado now where there's legal psychedelic therapy. You can fly to Costa Rica and do ayahuasca and it's perfectly legal. There's Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is a legal protection. It gets a little bit complicated with RAFRA, but it's a legal protection for using sacraments in a religious context. And then there's also churches like Santo Daime where using ayahuasca in the United States is fully legal because they have an exemption written from the DEA that says Santo Daime is allowed to order ayahuasca from Brazil and use it in the United States. So when we tell our story, the people at work or the people that might be skeptical know that we didn't necessarily do something illegal. We could have been in Costa Rica or we could have been in Colorado. And then we want to emphasize also the intentionality. With any psychedelic experience in these stories that we're telling is the intentionality, which is either to address something, to heal, maybe there's anxiety, social anxiety, or depression, or there's a purpose for it. Even if the purpose is just, I'm open to whatever the medicine teaches me, that is a purpose. When we're going home and using even cannabis every day, sometimes there's no purpose. It's just like light up a joint and just watch a movie. The purpose is to watch a movie and relieve stress. That's still a purpose, but drugs are sometimes used without a purpose. That's another difference between drugs and medicine. We have to be aware of our workplace policies, which is really important if you're a sworn employee anywhere. And my workplace policy, you'll have to look up what yours says, but mine says you shall not be under the influence of a controlled substance on duty. Great, I'm not doing ayahuasca ceremonies at work, nobody's doing that. So that's a non-issue. Another policy we have that's the catch-all that they like to use is you shall not bring discredit to the department. That's kind of an easy one too, because are you really bringing discredit to the department by advocating for a therapy that can completely change the depression and the burnout and all of these mental health problems we were talking about? I would argue the exact opposite to any gold badges or chiefs that question that is what brings discredit to the department? Is it when a paramedic didn't check out the rig in the morning because they were burnt out and they didn't have the medication that they needed and the patient got hurt or died? What about a traffic accident? Or what about a law enforcement incident? What really brings more discredit to the department? I'd say talking about psychedelics brings credit to the department. Being the first department in the country, or there's already departments in the countries that are actually embracing psychedelic types of therapy, but being among the first to embrace that is, in my opinion, brings a lot of credit to the department. My future vision with all of this is that we can show up to work and talk about psychedelics as easily as we can show up at work and say, we went to the bar and had a drink over the weekend. The only way we do that is by talking about it. The people sitting in Sacramento making the laws aren't gonna make a law that it's okay to talk about this. We have to do that, and that's taking the power back into our hands and showing people this movement is legit. This isn't drugs, this isn't a hippie movement. This is a therapeutic, medical, consciousness movement that helps people. And that's what I really want to push forward. I actually saw something this morning. Where is it? Here it is. When I was talking about that ego death during the ayahuasca ceremony, I actually heard it on YouTube this morning, Alan Watts describing an ego death. So if you guys are open to hearing Alan Watts' opinion on ego death, he explains why this is such a huge benefit and why the heroic dose is such a life-changing thing. Way better than I could ever do it. So if it's cool, I want to read it to you. This is the void, not a black hole, but an infinite openness of vastness without anchor or edge, and it is terrifying. You reach out to beliefs, to identities, to old ideas, and they collapse in your hand like paper lanterns in the rain. But if you can just let go, if you can stop clinging to the rock that is falling with you and simply fall, something marvelous happens. The fear melts. The void, which seemed cold and empty, begins to shine, not with light as from the sun, but with a clarity, a presence that is not a thing, but the absence of all clinging, a letting be. You discover that the void is not the absence of self, it is the truth of self, and that you were never a fixed thing to begin with. You were always a process, a pattern, a dance. You are the universe pretending momentarily to be a person. And so what seemed like death turns out to be awakening. Eventually, the storm quiets. The veil that had been torn open begins to mend, the dancing patterns still, the colors soften, and the senses begin to settle into their familiar grooves. And you find yourself once more in the everyday, but something has changed. The ordinary becomes radiant. You sit with a cup of tea, and it is no longer just tea. It is a miracle in a cup, light, water, time, all condensed into this simple moment. A whisper from the cosmos saying, you are home. And you begin to realize that there never was a separation between the sacred and the mundane, between enlightenment and confusion. You return, yes, but you are not the same one who left, because now you have seen through the veil. You have played hide and seek with God, and whether you remember the vision clearly or not, the knowing remains like a seed planted in the soil of the soul. Alan Watts. So I just wanted to share that. And I want to ask if you guys have any questions or anything.
Great presentation.